So we're back in Luke. Some of you may remember we are slowly, we're working our way through Luke's Gospel. We're to chapter 19, so we've got another 7 or 8 years to go, I think, before we finish the Gospel. But there is no rush. You know, it's still true. 7 or 8 years ago, 7 or 8 years in the future, it'll still be true. And today we are Luke 19, 1 to 10, story of Zacchaeus, the tax collector. It's a story that many of you, I imagine, will be familiar with, as it's a good old Sunday school classic. If you've grown up in the church, you're probably familiar with the story. Some of you may not be familiar with the story. This is a story that I think probably is we remember this story, we know the story, because there's a bit more happening in this story than we often get. A lot of the Gospels is just Jesus standing around talking to people. We don't even know their names. It's just what Jesus said. Here we've got a character with a name, Zacchaeus, and we've got some information about him. He's a chief tax collector, but we also know that he's short. That's important for the story. And he does something, he climbs a tree, and Jesus taught him. It's all, sort of in terms of the gospel, it's quite an exciting story. Zacchaeus is more of a fleshed out character than we might be used to in some of these stories about Jesus. So who is Zacchaeus? Well, we know his name, we know he's Zacchaeus, we know he's short, we know he's a tax collector. But who is he? Not what does he do for a living, what does he look like, who is he? I heard a story many years ago about a man who was once asked, "Are you a Christian?" And his reply, I thought it was a very good reply, his reply was, "Don't ask me if I'm a Christian. Ask my family, ask my neighbours, ask the people I work with, ask the people who see me when I go and do my shopping. Don't ask me, ask the people who know me whether I'm a Christian. Would they say I'm a Christian?" I thought that's a good response. But if you ask people, if you ask Zacchaeus' neighbours and friends and family, who is Zacchaeus? We're told that they would say, he's a sinner. That's who Zacchaeus is. He's a sinner. Why is he a sinner? Why is he classed as a sinner? Well, really, it's because of what he's done. He's a tax collector, not just any old tax collector. He's a chief tax collector, which I guess means he's really good at his job. Now, these days we may, think, tax collectors, taxes, blah, 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 blah. In those days, it was a bit more complicated. There was a genuine reason, if you like, why tax collectors were considered sort of outcasts, were considered sinners. And some of you will be familiar with this, but for those of you who aren't, it's really the reason why tax collectors are considered sinners is because of who they worked for. Now, at this time, Israel was ruled by the Roman Empire. It was part of the Roman Empire. And the Romans were in charge of the country, and the Jews weren't particularly happy about this because they were supposed to be God's people, but they were being ruled by a foreign empire, not just ruled quite firmly, quite oppressively by this Roman Empire. And there were those who were part of Israel yet worked with the Romans, particularly tax collectors. The Romans collected the taxes through men like Zacchaeus who were Jewish but worked with the Romans, and he had sided with the wrong people, if you like. He was a collaborator with the enemy. So he had put himself outside the community of the people of God. This is what Zacchaeus' community thought of him. He sided with the oppressors rather than his own people. He's making money out of the misery of his people. He's picked the wrong side, essentially. And this wasn't just a mild annoyance. This was enough for him to be an outcast, to be a sinner, to be pushed out of the community. But that's not all he is. Something else we know about Zacchaeus from this story is that he's actually keen to see Jesus. He actually wants to see Jesus. And he's not just, I think, mildly curious. There's a kerfuffle going on outside his house. He wants to see what's going on. He's quite determined to see Jesus, because when he can't see Jesus because he's too short and no one's going to let him through to the front of the crowd, he decides he's going to climb a tree. This is how committed he is to seeing Jesus. This chief tax collector decides, I'm going to climb a tree so that I can see Jesus. And when Jesus sees him, Jesus' response, I think, is quite interesting as well. Jesus calls him by name, so he knows Zacchaeus. I guess maybe by reputation he's quite an important figure in the community. Maybe he's heard people complaining about him, but he knows this man, Zacchaeus. And he says to Zacchaeus, I must stay at your house today. I must stay at your house today. Not a case of, oh, Zacchaeus, he's probably got a nice house, that'd be quite convenient, he's just down the road. I must stay at your house today. And Zacchaeus' response is to gladly welcome him. That's what he says, he gladly welcomes him. So this is why, this is not just curiosity. Zacchaeus is not just has this idle interest in who Jesus is, wants to see something. He's desperate to see Jesus. And then when Jesus says, I must stay with you, Zacchaeus is glad. He's happy to welcome Jesus. And if you put the pieces of this story together, you get the sense that Zacchaeus is kind of desperate to see Jesus. Like, there's this sense in Zacchaeus, I think, that he sees Jesus as someone who maybe can help him in some way. Someone who, I don't know, can give him something that he's perhaps lacking. Maybe he feels like he's made a mistake. He's become a tax collector, and he's become so good at being a tax collector that he's become a chief tax collector. And maybe there's something in him that's regretting this decision he's made to side with the Romans against his own people. He's feeling the pain of being an outcast, of being excluded from his community. And he thinks maybe Jesus can do something about this. Maybe he's heard that Jesus is someone who has time for the outcast, someone who has time for those who are on the fringes of society. Maybe he's heard that Jesus is someone who does not judge by appearance, but judges by the heart, the attitude. Maybe he sees Jesus, as many people did, as someone who is clearly touched by God, someone who is clearly been sort of blessed by God, and he feels like if I can just get close to Jesus, if I can see Jesus, then it's like seeing God, it's like being close to God. Maybe it's any one or several of those things, but whatever it is, there's something about Zacchaeus that he's wanting Jesus, and he's glad when Jesus notices him and wants to be with him. And Zacchaeus demonstrates for Jesus, if you like, he demonstrates, this is what my heart is, Jesus. Okay, I'm desperate to see you, and when you notice me, I'm glad to welcome you into my home. And maybe this is why Jesus says to Zacchaeus, I must stay with you. Because this is exactly why Jesus came. Maybe he sees a man who is trapped by his choices, who's been pushed to the outside of his community and wants a way out. And Jesus seems to suggest, as he does later, he seems to maybe Zacchaeus is someone who is lost, but is looking to be found, who wants to be found. And when Jesus encounters someone who is lost, but wants to be found, Jesus has no choice. He is compelled to stop and be with that person, because as Jesus himself said, this is why I came. This is my mission. I must stay with you, because you are precisely why I am here. And the people grumble, as they do elsewhere in the Gospels, that Jesus is mixing with the wrong type of people. He's mixing with a sinner. People have always grumbled about who Jesus spends his time with. They will continue to grumble, I think, about where Jesus seems to be found. And they say Jesus is mixing with the wrong people. Zacchaeus has alienated his own community. He's sided with the enemy. He's guilty of working with the oppressors. And the thing is, it's not as if they've misunderstood the situation. They're right. He has done this. He has done this. He's sided with the Romans against his own people. So it's not as if it's just a misunderstanding and people are jumping to conclusions. He has actually done something that is bad. And yet Jesus seems to want to spend time with him. And Zacchaeus' response, again, Zacchaeus responds to this grumbling, and he stands up and he speaks, but he doesn't speak to the crowd. He doesn't say to the crowd, listen everyone, I know what I've done in the past or whatever. He speaks to Jesus. He tells Jesus what he's going to do. It's like he's saying to Jesus, look, I know what they say about me, Jesus. I know what they say about you too. But let me show you who I really am. Don't listen to what they say about me. Let me show you who I really want to be. I'm not what these people say I am. I'm not the sinner that these people say that I am. Let me show you who I really am. I will give half my wealth away to the poor. And if I have cheated anyone, I will give them 4 times in repayment. I will return 4 times the amount. Now, there are a lot of tax collectors, I imagine, and one of the, if you like, benefits of being a tax collector is you had an amount of freedom as to what you charged. And, you kind of set your own wages, and you could charge the taxes plus what you wanted, essentially. And there were tax collectors who grew wealthy out of being corrupt, charging the people more than they owed in tax. And Zacchaeus was clearly good at his job because he's the chief tax collector and he's clearly wealthy. But this kind of Zacchaeus' response implies, I guess, I don't feel like he was a particularly corrupt man. Because his response, is if I have cheated anyone, I will return 4 times the amount. So this is a man who's speaking to Jesus, who's sort of revealing his heart to Jesus, and there's this statement like, well, it's not something that Zacchaeus feels he's done on a regular basis. It's not something that was a habit for Zacchaeus. It's something he said, I might have in the past cheated people. It may have happened. And if it's happened, I will pay back 4 times the amount. And if you are paying back 4 times the amount, if you have regularly cheated people, then 4 times the amount is a very quick way to run out of money. You're not going to be able to give half your wealth away and pay back 4 times the amount to everyone you cheated if you have regularly cheated people. So I feel like maybe Zacchaeus was not particularly corrupt tax collector, but he was labelled a sinner because he was a tax collector and he was clearly good at his job because he was wealthy and had been promoted. But anyway, this is Zacchaeus' response to the grumbling of the people. Look, Jesus, let me show you who I really am. And after he does this, Jesus declares, salvation has come to this house because this man too is a son of Abraham. So who is Zacchaeus? A short tax collector? A sinner? Jesus says he's a son of Abraham. That's who he is. And I think there's kind of a twofold thing going on here with this phrase. I think the obvious reading, the plain reading is Jesus is declaring that Zacchaeus is welcomed back, if you like, into the community of the people of God. He's saying to the people, you've pushed him to the outside because of the choices he's made, because of his job, because of who he sided with. But I'm telling you, I have looked at his heart, and he is one of the children of God. He is a son of Abraham. He is part of the community. He is included. Again, I feel like that's the plain reading of this declaration. But I do wonder if there's another thing that Jesus is saying here. I don't know this for certain. But I wonder if he's kind of also saying that Zacchaeus is a son of Abraham. And that Zacchaeus is actually demonstrating Abraham-like qualities. That Zacchaeus has the character of Abraham. Because if you look through the story of Genesis and you look at the story of Abraham, I know one of the things that in the Jewish faith Abraham is held up for and sort of commended for is his generosity and his hospitality. Abraham is held up as like an example of generosity and hospitality. And it's quite an interesting exercise if you fancy during this sometime. Going back, reading the chapters in Genesis about Abraham and looking out for signs of generosity and hospitality. And you'll find there's actually quite a few things in there where Abraham's generosity of spirit and his hospitality come through. And both of these things kind of meet in one of the stories in Genesis. In Genesis 18, there's a story where it's a quite confusing story. 3 visitors arrive, and are they regular visitors or are they God? Because God's there, and then he isn't there, and the visitors are there, and it's very confusing about who they are. But the thing is, when these 3 visitors arrive, and sort of there's this sense that God is present, and Abraham sees them coming, he says to Sarah, he says, we've got to bake some bread for our guests, we've got to be hospitable, and he says, how much bread should we make? I know. We'll use 22 litres of flour to bake bread for 3 guests. This is quite a lot of flour for 3 people. If you've ever made bread, 22 litres of flour is a lot of bread. But this story is this sense that when God shows up, Abraham is generous and hospitable to those around him. And I do wonder, or maybe I'm speculating here, that Jesus is kind of also saying, look, Zacchaeus' response when I show up, when God shows up, is generosity and hospitality. He's glad to welcome you into his house. And he is willing to give half his possessions to the poor and 4 times back to anyone he's cheated. He is a son of Abraham. He is demonstrating the character of Abraham. And this is how the story ends as we read here. A man who I think perhaps wants to break out of a cage that he finds himself in, that he's built for himself. And he sees Jesus as a way of being free. And he demonstrates a willingness, a desire to be found. And he shows through that desire, through that willingness to welcome God, that willingness to make things right, to be generous. He shows Jesus, this is who I really am. I know what people say about me, I know my reputation, but this is who I really am. This is who I want to be. And Jesus says, I agree. That's the real you. Not what all these people say. I have seen your heart, and you are accepted by God. You belong to God. You have been saved. You were lost, and you have been found. So that's the story. Maybe in some of the ways I've talked about it, there have been things that have made you think, or sort of made it connected with where you feel you're at. I kind of get to the end of the sermon, and I was getting to the end of the sermon, how am I doing this sermon? And I'm trying to think, what's going on here? And it's not always easy to end a sermon. It's not always easy to know what to say, how to sort of, what comes out of it. So I'm just going to talk about kind of what came out for me, and particularly, I suppose, personally, what I hear when I read this story. Because I think we live in a society, we live in a culture that is just becoming more and more fragmented. We've had Christmas, and some of you may have those kind of Christmases where you have a big family gathering, and you're there as a family, and you've all got smiles on your face, but you know that so-and-so isn't talking to so-and-so. And this part of the family doesn't like this part of the family. And there's these resentments here and there. And I almost feel like that's kind of how we are as a society. We're all, sort of live residents in the UK and so on, but we're in our factions and we don't talk to those people, and we don't like those people. And, we think, we support royal family, we support Meghan and Harry. It's all kind of, we're all in these groups, and we get increasingly angry and frustrated with one another. And I kind of almost feel like the Zacchaeus' time it was easier, because Zacchaeus at least had done something bad to be excluded. But I feel like these days you can get pushed out, you can get excluded, you can get looked down upon just because of, not even because of you doing anything, just because of what people think you think, or just because of what people, the way you look, or just because of the people you hang out with. I just feel like we're becoming more and more sort of angry with others and sort of becoming factionalised, if you like. And if you look at our political situation, that's how it comes. And I find that difficult because, I don't like to offend people, but you kind of feel like we live in a society where you're going to offend someone, you're going to upset someone, no matter what you do. You can't be yourself because someone's going to be angry with you for being yourself. And I just keep coming back to this idea that one of the things I love about Jesus is that the only thing that matters to Jesus is what's in your heart. I feel like I keep coming back to that idea that Jesus cuts through everything and looks at your heart. And that's what he's interested in. And if you harbour in your heart sort of greed and pride and bitterness and all these things, it doesn't matter, what you look like, what your place is in society. Jesus is not going to be greatly impressed with you. But on the other hand, if you feel like you're pushed to the outskirts of society, if you feel like you don't quite fit, if you feel like you struggle to belong to a group, if you feel like you don't know what your place is in society, if you feel like you are lost, Jesus says, well, what's going on in your heart? How's your heart? That's what matters to him. And if you have in your heart this desire to draw closer to God, this desire to be a better person, this desire to know God better, then Jesus says, it doesn't matter what anyone says, you're my type of person. You're a child of Abraham. That's what Jesus says. And some of you may feel like you're on the outskirts of God's community, if you like. That maybe you never really made peace with God. Maybe you would not say, I'm a Christian, I don't know what it means. But there's something in your heart that wants to know God, wants to draw closer to him. Well, Jesus, another thing I love, Jesus' response is, I must stay with you. I must be with you. I must get to know you better. There's no sense in Jesus of you being unworthy for him. No sense in Jesus of you being an outcast to him. His response is, I must know you. I'm compelled to know you. I have to know you. And I think for those of us who feel lost in one way or another, there are no greater words in the gospel than how this ends. The Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. That's who Jesus is. That is what he does. That is what he's compelled to do. And in my life, the more I've let go of anything other than trying to know God better, the more I've let go of anything other than trying to draw close to Jesus, I've discovered that Jesus draws the best out of me. I become a better man because of Jesus. That's the only way I know how to put it. That, like Zacchaeus, my response to Jesus' grace is, I want to be more generous. I want to be hospitable. I want to be a better man. But this is what Jesus does. And the really unbelievable thing about this is that I feel that when this happens, Jesus' response is to say, you know what, James? That's actually the real you. This thing that Jesus draws out of me, this is the real me. All the other stuff, that's the fake me. The me I am when Jesus is close, that's the real me. And it's a better man than I would be when I'm trying to fit in to a society, or I'm trying to not upset or offend or worry too much about other people. Jesus brings the best out of me. And it just blows my mind that God thinks, well, you know what, James, that's the real me. That's who I made you to be. That's who you really are. And this is what I see in this story we read this morning. This is what it means to me. And so I hope you see something similar. I hope you see Jesus as one who doesn't see you as an outcast, but wants to draw close to you. When you feel like you are far from God, when you feel like, I'm a Christian, but I know my life isn't what God wants it to be, and I want to be better. Jesus' response is, I must stay with you. You're my type of man, my type of woman. You're who I want to stay with. For the Son of Man came to seek and save what was lost.